Hey everybody, this is Missy. I'm back, ready to start officially reviewing for the AP exam. So at this point, almost all of you have turned in your review guides for chapters 1 and 2. I just want to make mention real quick before I get started with review that as I graded, especially the ones that were turned in today, I noticed that a lot of you took someone else's work and turned it in as your own. I'm aware of the fact that one student did take the document and ended up typing into it, and it, I guess, saved. I have no idea. I don't understand how this works. So we're going to try and fix that problem as we move forward. But that person was upfront with me and told me, like, hey, I accidentally did this. So once I saw that person's review guide, I then started to open up and look at others that were the exact same. So just so you guys know, I'm not just looking to see that you turn it in. Like, I am looking to see that it's done, that it's complete. I gave some people comments on things. You are getting credit if you do it, but it's not helping you to cheat. Like, this stuff, especially the chapter 2, that's going to be on the exam. Like, I don't know. There's, like, I wish I could do this in person, but nothing I can do other than ask you, please take the time to actually do your own work, because turning in someone else's as your own, not only is it basically plagiarism, but it's just, it's not helping. You're not going to do well in the exam by cheating on these assignments. So please just do it. They're not long assignments, and you have an entire week to get them done. And I know that you have other classes, I'm aware. But I'm not really asking a ton from you. And please also use your Myers textbook. Some of us, I think, maybe are looking stuff up on the internet. So I just want to make sure you're using your notebook, your textbook, the notes you've taken in my class, just to make sure you're getting accurate information. So, okay. With that said, the next time I will just issue zeros if I know that you've copied someone else's work. If I see a bunch that are turned in and look the same, I will just, every single one of them will go in as a 0, because there's no way for me to today. This time I knew who did the original one, but in the future I probably won't know. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I think that will solve this problem, and I'll put this in the in Google Classroom as a reminder the next time. I think if we take the document, make your own copy, and save it, then you can type into your own if you want to type. Those of you who want to handwrite, perfect, that's fine. Print it, fill it in, take pictures. I'm fine with however you guys choose to take your notes and fill in your review guides. Okay. So hopefully the next time this will be a little bit smoother. I apologize. All this online stuff is kind of new to me. So let's go ahead and get started. Sorry, I'm going to go briefly through chapter 1. There's not a whole lot there that I want to emphasize. And then with the chapters 2 stuff, I'm going to kind of harp on some stuff that has come up on a lot of FRQs in the recent AP exams within like the last 5 to 10 years. So the terms that they use the most often. So we'll just make sure that we're all clear with everything. Okay. So if you don't have your review guides in front of you, get them now. Or you can just use your own, paper, pencil, write stuff down, take some notes just to make sure you add stuff. Some people had stuff incorrect. I just want to make sure that we are getting the most out of this review that we can, since we can't see each other in person. Okay, so looking at the chapter 1, that first page, the only thing on that chart I'm really concerned about right now, I think we are pretty good, other than Wilhelm Wundt. Remember, he is our kind of father of psychology, first psych lab, first psych experiment. Remember, that was in Germany. That was not in the United States. G. Stanley Hall actually opened the first psych lab at Johns Hopkins University, but Wundt was in Germany, like Leipzig. It's not important that you know that, I don't think, but what you do want to know is that he used introspection. So remember, introspection is that looking within, as he did his kind of time reaction experiment. He used introspection. So looking within, looking at a person's own thoughts, feelings, which do in fact come from our experiences. So that would have been nurture. Again, not overly concerned about the nature nurture side on that so much as that, he's your first psych lab, first psych experiment, and that he introspection. Okay, moving forward, just to emphasize using your textbook, the psychology definition. I saw some definitions that were not what we learned in class. It is the science of or the study of behavior and mental processes. So if you're looking at the definition of psychology, it's behavior, mental processes. Okay, moving on, making sure I think we're all good with the nature nurture issue. Nature being that contribution from your genetics, nurture being the experience, environmental contributions, making sure that we all understand that it is always a combination of the two in anything that we look at for psychology. And then just jumping down to the perspectives and just making sure, and we'll get into some of these in more detail as we go with review, but making sure that we know, who Charles Darwin is in evolutionary perspective. Sigmund Freud was psychoanalytic. When we get into behavioral, we got really important names there. And the behaviorists really make sure that you understand that whole everything has to be observable. It's all about observable responses. And so that belief that, everything in psychology should be completely objective and that there should be no reference to mental processes whatsoever. This starts with Ivan Pavlov and John B. Watson and Skinner and Thorndike, even Albert Bandura when we talk about the Bobo doll and observational learning. So think about your behaviorists, think about what that means to take a behavioral approach. And then obviously once we get to chapter 6 review, we'll talk a little bit more about operant classical conditioning and those things. And then your humanists, Maslow and Rogers, are going to be really important names to make sure you know, which again, we get to personality. I'll talk about them in more detail. And Maslow we'll talk about more when we talk about motivation. So there won't be much as far as social cultural, just because we skipped the social psych chapter this year. So I think we all understand the social cultural approach, but as far as that, we won't see anything on the exam. Making sure you know the difference between basic and applied research, just knowing that basic is going to be those jobs where we're just trying to further knowledge, doing research, versus applied where we're actually solving problems. And those different jobs are there. Remember, psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, the big difference is being able to prescribe drugs, psychiatrists having gotten medical degrees. Okay, so chapter 2, this is where I'm going to spend most of my time. And again, I went off of, there's another teacher somewhere who's better than me, went through and kind of made a list of all the terms that have been used most frequently on FRQs in the last, I think 10 years. And so I want to make sure that we kind of are solid on all of those things. So I'm going to move to first, the second part where we're looking at theory, hypothesis. Hypothesis has come up, I think, only a couple of times. I think we all know what a hypothesis is, but when we're setting up any type of study, the most important thing, and this has come up 6 times in the last 9 years, and it's something everybody struggles with, is operational definitions. So please make sure you understand what they are and why we need them. So an operational definition, remember, it's a statement of the procedure that we use when we're conducting an experiment. It's how we measure our variables. How are we measuring our independent and our dependent variables? We have to operationally define those variables. And the reason we need to do that is for replication. Others repeating our same study, getting similar results gives validity to that study. So remember, my example from class was if I'm conducting a research study to look at how caffeine affects test performance, I have to operationally define caffeine and test performance. Those are my 2 variables, my independent and my dependent. So I have to, if someone else wants to repeat this, they have to understand what is caffeine? How are we measuring that? How are we ingesting it? Is it a pill? Is it, a liquid? If it is a drink, what type of drink? Are we drinking coffee? Are we drinking, Monster? How much caffeine is in the, independent variables? So those are all those things that have to be a part of that operational definition. So please make sure that you understand what that is, how it's super important when we're conducting an experiment, because there's a good chance you'll see that on that second FRQ, which is going to be research. Next, case study has come up a couple of times. Case studies, remember, are where we are looking at one person or a small group in depth. The reason that we use case studies is typically because we're looking at a scenario that is something that's maybe rare, abnormal. We don't see it often, so we conduct case studies so we can look at that one person or small group in depth. Remember, though, we cannot generalize our findings to a larger group. So one, abnormal case can be very misleading to the general population. So we can't take our findings and then generalize them. With naturalistic observation, that's very simply looking at people. Usually it's used with animals when we're talking, studies and why we would use it usually with animals, but you can use it with human beings. Remember, there's no manipulation. You're looking at people in their naturally occurring environments. So that means that there's absolutely no control from the person who's conducting the study. They're not manipulating at all, which means that those people and or animals do not realize that they're being observed. And then surveys. The biggest thing I want to make sure that we know about conducting surveys. First off, we conduct a survey because we want to be able to, get either the, attitudes, beliefs, opinions of a large group of people all at one time. We can send out a survey to hundreds and thousands of people, and we can get back a lot of information. It's quick, it's efficient, it's usually cost effective. But remember, wording effects come into play. The way questions are worded can change the way people answer. People may also fall victim to social desirability, where maybe they're not necessarily telling the truth when they answer questions in a survey. But make sure that you understand the difference between your population, which is your group of interest. If I want to conduct a study among high school students in the United States about their preference of, soft drink, then I will draw a sample from that population. So my population is that larger group of interest. Those people I actually survey is my sample. That's one of the most commonly mixed up when we're talking about research methods. People really mix up population and sample quite a bit. So make sure you understand that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And then remember, we use random sampling. We want to avoid any type of sampling bias. So we want to make sure that every person in the population has an equal chance of being included in that survey. So we use random sampling to try and avoid any type of bias. From a random sampling survey, random assignment is an experiment, which I'll get to here in a second. Okay, these are all descriptive studies. That was that. I think it was, I don't remember what number. I kind of tweaked your document a little bit, but there was a fill in the blank, and it was like they all describe behavior. They do not explain it, but describe it. Now, correlation. Correlation has come up just as many times as operational definition, 6 times in the last 9 years on FRQs. So making sure you understand a correlation just means that there's a relationship between two variables. One does not cause the other. That is very important, that correlation is not causation. And when we are looking at correlation coefficients, remember that number is always going to be between -1 and 1. It cannot be any larger or smaller. So somewhere between -1 and 1. The closer we are to 1 or -1, the stronger the correlation. As that coefficient gets closer to 0, the correlation gets weaker. So remember, negative does not mean weak, okay? Negative just simply shows us the direction of the variables. So if we looked at a scatter plot and we looked at a positive correlation, we would see that both variables are moving in the same direction. If we saw a negative correlation on a scatter plot, we would see that they are both moving in, or that they are moving in opposite directions. As one increases, the other one decreases. I will tomorrow, I will upload a document for you that has all of the different types of charts and graphs that you may see on the AP exam, so that you'll have those for review, and it will have all of your scatter plots. I think we're all good with scatter plots, but just in case, I'll give you guys a document to use as a reference. So just make sure you understand, again, correlation, not causation, how to read a coefficient, looking at positive, negative, what that tells us about the relationship and the strength. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Illusory correlation also has come up. I don't think a lot, no, just once. But illusory, remember, that means it's an illusion. There appears to be a correlation there where there, in fact, is not one. And the big one from your textbook was that people who adopt and are able to conceive children. There's not a correlation there, even though we hear of those really amazing cases where that happens. There is, in fact, no correlation. It is an illusory correlation. Moving on to experiments. Experiment has come up 6 times in the last 9 years as well. Those are the top 3 terms from this chapter: operational definitions, correlation, and experiment. So experiment's the next one. Remember, we use experiments because it's the only way to show a cause and effect relationship. Okay, that's important. That's the reason that we use an experiment, and why it can show cause and effect is because we actually control our variables. So along with that, there have been several instances, 5 to be exact, where people have had to identify dependent variables. Okay, independent variable, it also shows up, but dependent, for whatever reason, has been on there more than the independent. So just remember, your independent is your treatment. That is your manipulated factor. Okay, so in my study I mentioned earlier, caffeine, that is the factor that is being manipulated to see how it affects, or my outcome factor, the dependent, which in that case was test scores. So just, again, I think that we're good. I'm very confident you guys understand how to do this, but just brush up on it. I'll give you some practice sheets if you need them, but just make sure that you are good on identifying variables, because that is a very strong possibility you'll be asked to do that on that second FRQ. And then confounding variables, just to make mention, remember that's anything other than that independent variable that may alter or affect the outcome of your experiment. Okay. All right. Sorry, just making sure. Okay. Descriptive and inferential statistics. Now, these are 2 terms that we did talk about in class, and they both have come up on FRQs. And I had this horrible feeling that if you guys saw them, you would be like, what? I don't think I've ever heard that before. I probably didn't spend enough time talking about it. Very simple. And remember, do not use the root word in your definition. But if we're looking at descriptive statistics, it's just numerical data that allows us to explain characteristics of a group. Okay, this is going to be things like your mean, median, mode, so your measures of central tendency, or your measures of variation, standard deviation, and range. These are just data, numbers that we use to explain, like me coming into class and saying, here was your class average on this test. That is data that gives me an explanation or a description, hence descriptive statistics, of the data. It describes your group, your class. Here's how your class did. Okay. So that's what your measures of central tendency and your measures of variation are. They are descriptive statistics. I don't feel like I need to go through them. Median and mean have come up the most often on AP FRQs. And obviously, most of you did it on your review. Some of you, I don't know if you just didn't read carefully or what, but most of you correctly circled the mean as that score. Remember, that is heavily affected by outliers. So when we have extreme scores, that will affect that mean score, which is why it's not always a good picture of your data. We are better off, remember, looking at our variation. So when we talk about range is just going to be the difference between the highest and lowest scores. But standard deviation, remember, is going to tell us how much each one of our scores varies from the mean score. And most of us did remember to either highlight or circle that scores with low variation are those scores that are more reliable. So we want low variation for reliability in our scores, okay? The normal curve, I've seen this come up in multiple choice. I don't know that they would ask you this on an FRQ, but this year is so different, who knows? So with the normal curve, make sure that you remember we're looking at those measures of central tendency being right there in the middle. So we have a perfect bell, which means when we're looking at our mean score, half the scores are going to be above it and half the scores are going to be below it, okay? And 68% of those scores will be within 1 standard deviation of the mean, while 95% will fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean, okay? Those were important numbers to know, so if you forgot them and you have a question, just shoot me an email. Okay, so there we are for our descriptive statistics. Now, inferential statistics. This is going to be numerical data that gives us the ability to generalize. So when we want to take our data and be able to apply it to a population or a larger group. Okay, so if I want to take the outcome of my experiment and I want to apply those findings that caffeine does in fact improve test scores, and I want to be able to generalize that data to a larger group. That's inferential statistics, okay? Do not say infer. Please make sure you use the word generalize, okay? That is the right word to use if you have to talk about these in a free response question. Again, don't use the root word. So if we want to be able to say something is true of a larger population, we want to be able to use inferential data, which is statistical significance. This is one thing I checked on every single person's review guide. I wanted to make sure that you guys had this correct. A lot of us did not. So let's review it real quick. And when we're talking about statistical significance in psychology, remember it's that p-value. Well, it's always the p-value, but in psychology, that p-value needs to be less than or equal to 0.05. And what that means is that we only want to have a 5% likelihood that our results occurred by chance. Anything higher than 5%, we would say is invalid, that our results are not significant, meaning some other factor has given us our results other than that independent variable. So in psychology, we want to be able to say with absolute certainty our results did not occur by chance, with that p-value, the statistical significance being either equal to or less than or equal to, sorry math people, 0.05 or 5%, okay? So what it is, statistical significance is the likelihood that our results occurred by chance. And to be able to rule that out, we need that p-value to be at 0.05 or lower, okay? If that is not clear, again, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to jump on to Google Meet with any of you or all of you and talk about any of this. If you guys need further explanation, it may be easier if you can ask me questions live. So I'm more than happy to do that with you guys. Last thing, and then I'm going to wrap up, and this doesn't really need much explanation, is the ethics. The ethical stuff comes up. The big ones that they usually look for is informed consent and debriefing. So make sure, again, I think we all know what it means to get informed consent. You have to get permission. You cannot force anyone to participate in any type of psychological research or study. And once it is over and data has been collected, you need to debrief. You must tell your participants what you were doing, what your purpose was. Okay. Beyond that, I know I skipped over a lot of stuff, but those are kind of the high points. I'm not saying everything else isn't important, but those are the things. If there's any confusion, reach out, let me know. Make sure that you're good on all of those things. We're not done reviewing for chapter 2. I have a lot more coming at you tomorrow. Get ready. We're going to practice doing some FRQs and some things like that. So I'll have all that out to you in Google Classroom tomorrow morning. But for tonight, I just wanted to get this review out to you so you guys can be going through and making sure that everything you have in those review guides is accurate and that you have all the information that you need moving forward. So good talking with you. Hope you're all doing well. maybe I'll get to see you here in a few weeks. Not holding my breath, but that'd be super awesome. Um, yeah, and if you guys need anything, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out. Bye.